Welcome back to the Fantasy Formula. And Zach and I are finally rested up after an unforgettable weekend at Silverstone. Zach, we had some cool experiences on this show this year, but this one takes the cake.
Yeah, I mean, this has to take the cake for one of the coolest experiences probably in my life in general. So I can't believe we got to experience all of that. And hey, on top of all of that, F1 Fantasy wasn't too shabby as well.
It was a good week for us in F1 Fantasy for sure. And over the course of the weekend, Zach, Terry, and myself, we interviewed over 44 people across the Formula 2 and Formula 3 paddocks. And make sure you check out the Fan Amp YouTube, all of our individual socials, because this content has been flowing out for the last few weeks, and we have a lot more for you too. So make sure you check it out. Now, usually this is the part of the show where I ask you to like and subscribe. I want to take a moment just to thank everybody because if it wasn't for our great listeners throughout the course of this season, we wouldn't have such an amazing opportunity like we had at Silverstone. All of you viewing our content and engaging with it, that got us the attention we needed to be at one of the biggest races of our lives so far. So, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. So we're going to start this week with some breaking news because F1 Fantasy Tools just broke that the British Grand Prix fantasy scores have been updated long after the checkered flag has been waved. We have 8 drivers that you can see on your screen here that have lower overtake totals than were first reported when the scores were finalized a few weeks ago. If we go through these, the biggest loser was Kimi Antonelli, going from 9 overtakes to 0. But there were also a lot of popular drivers like Ocon, Behrman, Alonso, and Hulkenberg that all lost points. So make sure you check your teams, check your global league rankings, because there's been some shift in the last few days that maybe a lot of us weren't aware of. Now, as far as how this happened, F1 overtake telemetry, it's not always perfect, and sometimes they do have to update these things after the fact. There was the 2024 Mexican Grand Prix where Albon and Sonoda both collided on lap 1 and DNF'd, but they had 15 plus overtakes at the end of the scoring. That had to be cycled out the next day too. So F1 fantasy overtakes, not always a perfect science, but they do have it right now.
Yeah, I'm just happy that at least we had this little bit of a break in between because, yeah, it took a little while to get all of this done, and I think that's why it took people aback quite a bit because I don't think anyone was expecting it just in the middle between Silverstone and Spa.
There was a funny comment made by Luke, who's one of the other creators in our space. He said, imagine if F1 fantasy left us on calculating for 2 weeks, how much panic that would set in. So at least they didn't do that to us.
So now heading on to the first chip that we want to really consider for Spa, and that is the extra DRS. So I don't actually think we've really spoken about extra DRS a lot this season so far, because it is one that comes into effect more in the second half of the season. Now, instantly, I will admit it's still not my favorite chip to use 100% right now, as I do think potentially come Brazil, come Kota, we might have teams that can have Piastri Norris, Piastri Verstappen, Piastri one of the Ferrari drivers with McLaren and another A-tier constructor. However, this by all means will give you brilliant points, and it won't really hurt using Sauber with the form they've been in at the minute if they continue. And I think, yeah, I agree. Oscar Piastri looks like the clear-cut winner for free timesing on your team. Even when he gets beaten by Lando Norris, he still outscores him in F1 Fantasy. It's happened now 2 weekends in a row, which is quite incredible of a statistic. And then, yeah, it has to be the other McLaren of Lando Norris if you do use it this weekend. So again, it's one of the better weekends to use it, but for me, I would still push it further on to the season.
It's going to be interesting. We have Sauber that's on 6 straight $0.6 million gains, and they can still absorb a DNF in this one and gain $0.6 million again. So this could be another mechanism to gain cost cap and get decent points. But like Zach said, I'd like to wait a little bit later in the season when we can afford a slightly better team to use the extra DRS boost. But I'm also being mindful of the fact that I have 4 chips left, and after this week, there's only 11 races left. So every 2 or 3 races, I'm going to have to drop one of these chips, and it might not be in a perfect scenario. So at some point, we're going to have to buckle down and use them all. Now I want to move on to a take that you'll only find here on the Fantasy Formula, because I've been tracking Max Verstappen engine penalties for 3 years now. He must prefer to start in the middle of the pack here at Spa, because for the last 3 races at the Belgian Grand Prix, he has taken an engine penalty. And if you look at all of the times that Max Verstappen has taken an engine penalty, he's been incredible. 4 out of the last 5 engine penalties have resulted in race wins for Max, including that enormous Brazil 2024 performance where he recorded that record 77 fantasy points. So I'll be keeping a close eye on Max this weekend to see, does he take another engine penalty? Does he like starting in the back of the pack? And on a sprint weekend, could he score a few extra points and give us a differential if you want to avoid that Oscar Lando build with the 3x boost? Now, as for whether or not he's eligible for an engine penalty, he is at the limit for control electronics and energy stores. So he is lined up for a 10-place grid penalty. And if I had to bet now, I think he does take that penalty. So I'm keeping an eye on Max. Now, as far as how to use them, there's a 100% chance he's going to lose value, according to F1 Fantasy Tools and their latest projections. So I recommend, if you're not going to use the 3x boost, you want to keep an eye on Max. Maybe he's a final fix candidate based on how he does in qualifying and whether or not he takes the penalty.
Yeah, this would be a very, very strong weekend to use Final Fix at any point. Of course, because you can use it after the sprint or the quali on a sprint race weekend, especially if Max does take this penalty. So really excited to see exactly how that works out. However, going on to our next talking point, talking about more chips we could use, it then becomes a situation of, well, what chip do we use? Because there's a chance if Verstappen, or to be fair, any one of the big dogs takes a grid penalty, I would like them for final fix. You've also got the extra DRS, which isn't too shabby right now. You also have no negative. Spa, historically, a lot of the time can get wet. And we've seen just how chaotic every single time this season a wet race happens. Most of the rookies crash out. We have so many DNFs just in general. No negative could be a brilliant play here as well. But again, that's one of those things where we'll know closer to the deadline. Realistically, you always want to play no negative an hour or so before the deadline, just so you know 100%, okay, this is the best forecast we're going to get for it. And then, hey, don't also forget Limitless. If you still haven't used Limitless, you're running out of time before people can finally build these meta teams, and you've got to use it soon. And I'd recommend Spa now, because we get to see the top 5 in the sprint quali, which is a brilliant insight. Spa doesn't get too many overtakes as well, so it should be top heavy on the points. So for me, there's a lot of chips to consider, but it's very much going to become dependent on that. Definitely that hour before the deadline is going to be very important.
I want to stir the pot on no negative a bit because I love looking at the weather forecast way far out, start thinking about what some of my options are. Right now, 40% chance of rain on Saturday, about 25% chance of rain earlier in the day on Sunday. So it might be a bit like Silverstone where the track is wet and you're not sure if you should start the race on inters or slicks. So I think this is perfect no negative weather. We've seen the rookies get absolutely killed between Australia and Silverstone in these wet weather conditions. So if you're loading up on cheaper drivers, no negative might be the chip for you.
So tier list wise, again, it changes up quite a bit from Silverstone now to Spa. Now you'll see instantly in the premium buy, it's pretty easy to know which A-tier driver to use in most teams this weekend. It's got to be Oscar Piastri. He needs 16 points to go up 0.3 million. Everyone else needs 35 plus, which is tinkering on just too much to use them in a normal team. And then again, constructor-wise, McLaren and Ferrari, the only actual A-tier constructors now who still need negative points to go up 0.3. Mercedes and Red Bull now need a lot of points. Red Bull need 59 to go up 0.3, and Mercedes needs 66. And that brings me on to my next little section of why Mercedes are on the fence. Realistically, Russell, he needs 51 points to go up 0.3 million. Like I mentioned, Mercedes 66. They have to have the best race of their entire history for me to even look into them. I'm saying Russell and Antonelli need to be both in the top 3 in the sprint quali for Mercedes to even be an option as a constructor. And then it also goes into those meta builds, which is why I'm a little bit conflicted about it all, of when to bring in Russell, because Russell doesn't look like a good budget building asset. So if you do go to these meta potential points teams, you really are stuck there now if you go this weekend to Russell. So that's why they're on the fence. I don't think we've seen enough from Mercedes the last few weekends. Points-wise as well, Russell 22 and 8 in the last 2 weekends. Mercedes 19 and 7. We just haven't seen enough from Mercedes. Ferrari still look like the second best constructor. So yeah, Mercedes on the fence right now. They have to pull something out of the bag.
And so for those of you that are considering the 4 A-tier builds like Zach, it sounds like maybe we ought to wait another week or two just so that we're totally lined up to have them. And if you can't quite afford a Piastri, McLaren, Ferrari build, rather than go to Mercedes, maybe you try one of these high upside B-tier constructors. We've finally given some more love to Aston Martin and Haas. Haas has the most value gained of any asset in the game this year at 4.4 million. Aston Martin on a bit of a roll, and if it rains, I love Alonso and Stroll, both really, really good drivers in the wet conditions. Stroll alone, 16 points in Australia, 22 at Silverstone, and he's also a buy as a B tier driver. So keep an eye out on those B tier assets. Also, we got a lot of feedback about the lack of love for drivers that are on the price floor. So now Liam Lawson, Franco Colapinto, we bumped them both up because, of course, they can't lose any value and they enable more expensive assets throughout your team. So we heard you. We've gotten it right now.
Yeah, it makes things quite interesting for this weekend. I love talking about the B tier drivers. It always seems like that's where the action is in F1 Fantasy this season. Like we mentioned, we've got the clear cut Hulkenberg, 30 minus 34 points needed. It's got 0.6. He's slap bang in our teams. But to be fair, knowing our luck, now there's going to be 2 DNFs in the sprint and the race, and he's not going to get that minus 0.6. Plus 0.6, I mean. But realistically, yeah, from having that price floor, it really does bring in a lot of B tier drivers, and I love it. So there's so many options. I think the clear cuts are Hulkenberg and Behrman. I think everyone's going to have those two. Then you also get to the teams who can't afford Stroll because he's at 8.5. Then do you go to Gasly at 6.6, or do you go, okay, maybe that's a little bit too risky for me, those 7 points? You could go to the likes of Lawson and just play it safe, get some points, and not worry about going down negative budget. So I love it this weekend. Definitely Hulkenberg, Behrman, the top two, Stroll, the third best if you can afford it. But then that final pick, it really is up in arms.
So now putting it all together into our top lineups for this week, this first team, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Costs 117.9 million. And it's the drivers that we've been going with for the last few weeks. Piastri, Hulkenberg, Alonso, and then your favorite flavors of B-tier drivers. I like Behrman and Gasly here, but you could alternate with Stroll or one of the drivers at the price floor. But really getting in McLaren and Ferrari on a sprint weekend, as hot as they've been, I think this team's going to do just fine.
Yeah, it really is just depending on the budget. Like you said, I prefer the likes of Lance Stroll over Gasly just because I can afford it. But again, you're starting to look close to 120 million for those sorts of teams. However, I do just like Lawson instead of Gasly at that sort of consideration as well, because then lots of people can bring in those sorts of teams as well. So plenty of movement that can happen. But from the looks of things, like I mentioned earlier, we have those two definite clear cut of Behrman, Hulkenberg. And I think both of us just really like Alonso because a lot of people have just Alonso in their team already. Then onto the dilemma team that I have, and it's quite nicely called the Zach Attack. It's 122.4 million, and it is just a lot of cash, especially for a lot of people. So a lot of people can't use this team, but a lot of people now have enough for the meta. But I say meta, Mercedes have just completely let us down in the last few weeks, and it's made it so hard to bring these teams in. If anyone can remember, actually, I've been talking about these teams all the way back since like Imola and those sorts of races, because I did think Antonelli could become someone we could use with the McLaren Mercedes strategies, and then we would be smooth sailing for the rest of the week season, but it just hasn't worked out like that. And I now do think we're in a situation where come Spa, I don't think this team is worth it, especially if you can take a -10. If it takes a -10, do not go near it. It's now only worth it if you can do Piastri, Russell, McLaren, and Ferrari, but that will cost you 127. I know some people can do that, and now I do think it's building budget towards getting to that, but with where Ferrari are, with those potential upgrades coming in, doing Ferrari some justice this season, I just think right now, it doesn't look any good. Like I mentioned, Mercedes have to be top 3, top 4, both drivers for me to go anywhere near this team right now.
This is good news for those of us with a lower cost cap because that means we're all back on even footing for this week. We can build up our cost caps a little bit more and enter this 4 premium A tier lineup around the same time as teams like Zach that have been saving more aggressively and faster. So keep our fingers crossed so we can catch up soon. Now, this is the 3X Express. This is the team that Zach talked us through earlier where we're using our extra DRS boost. The big question for this lineup is, who gets your 3x and who gets your 2x. I think to start the week, Piastri deserves the top spot and Norris with the 2x, but I can see why some of you might want a differential to flip it around, especially considering Norris's form at Silverstone. This team comes in at 119.6 million, but you can bring in the price for drivers and get this lineup for as cheap as 112.2 million. So you don't have to have a huge budget to run a team that's this good. So keep your options open and see if this team's right for you.
Yeah, it very much is going to come down to the B tier drivers on what you choose. But luckily for you, if you are using it for the extra DRS, which I do recommend, I still don't see these triple McLaren teams on normal weekends beating the Piastri McLaren Ferrari teams unless there's weird DNFs. So yeah, it's very much still only used if you are planning to use extra DRS. And then one final team for everyone to consider if you are just starting the game or if those budget buildings really hasn't been kind to you, as a lot of people come into this season not knowing exactly how it all works. This one is for you. At 99.6 million, you can still run Piastri, which is the most consistent, best price and best budget A-tier driver. You have Nico Hulkenberg in the form of his life. You have Fernando Alonso, Pierre Gasly, Ollie Behrman, all of these really good B-tier drivers that look good for budget. So if finally getting that budget moving for anyone on these teams, plus getting in the good points. Then you also have McLaren and you have Haas. Now, Haas, Sauber, Aston Martin, it all comes down to realistically who looks better in the sprint qualifying for me, or potentially with B-tier constructors who actually looks worse. So we get more overtake points potential. However, realistically, it's between those three B-tier constructors. And right now, for now, Haas look like the safest bet after Silverstone.
This team looks really good. You've got the Haas constructor, like I mentioned earlier, that leads all assets in price gain on the season with 4.4 million. And Oscar Piastri, interestingly, leads all drivers in cost cap building this year. So just slowly and steadily building his value. And plus, you get some great points upside across those B tier drivers. So for 99.6 million, I like it. All right, let's look at our fan amp picks from the British Grand Prix. And it was not our finest week because we're trying to share Wi-Fi with 300,000 other fans. So it looks like Zach, Terry, and I didn't pick all of the events. Terry might have been on the wrong side of the Wi-Fi for all of them. So we're going to shake off this week, get ready to come back in Spa because all three of us are doing really well in the overall standings. So make sure you join us on the Fan Amp app and make your picks today. And a big congratulations to our prize winners. We had Is91 Sam, who scored the most points over the last 6 races. And a new sector is starting for Spa. So make sure you join us because you can win prizes each week, or every 6 races, or randomly throughout the season. So there's a lot of chances to win. Now, Zach, moving on to the Fantasy Formula Featured League, 60,000 teams strong, but there's only one on top this week, and that's Sean Cryatt. Just a nearly perfect lineup with Piastri, McLaren, and Ferrari for Sean this week. Nice and easy, nothing crazy for him. The top scoring team this week, though, was Oldie Racing, and this one's going to blow your mind. 3x on Lando, 2x on Hulkenberg with Stroll, McLaren, and Haas for 356 points. That is a worldie.
I think we've got someone who can travel in time there. Honestly, how can you predict something like that?
And also, the McLaren Mini League is going on right now on F1.com, and you can win some great prizes, including a private tour of the McLaren Technology Center. So make sure you enter this week. We'll be live this Saturday at 5 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. BST to take all of your questions ahead of the sprint race for Spa. Remember, lineups lock at the start of the sprint race, so get those lineups locked nice and early. We'll see you then, and thank you so much for watching.
Take care, everyone.